I need to start, of course, with Iran and the latest headlines from Israel, where Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel has evidence showing that Iran had a secret program, I should say, to build nuclear bombs. Knowing what you know about what's been going on in the Middle East, what's your response to that? What's your thinking on it?
Well, obviously, you're going to have to examine very carefully what the documents say that has been disclosed by the Israeli government today. But plainly on the face of it, it's very serious. These things have to be investigated as to whether they constitute breaches of the agreement. But I think more than that, what it does is it will increase pressure on those who want to keep the agreement to make sure that it is adjusted in order to take account of other things like the ballistic missile program and so on. So I think it's a further ratcheting up of pressure before the president comes to make his decision.
Yeah, and the president, of course, is set to make that decision in about 2 weeks' time on whether the U.S. should pull out or stay in the nuclear deal. For those who want to see the U.S. stay in there, and I'm referring to Europe, for instance, what did they do next? How did they fortify their argument?
Well, I think we're going to have to examine what's just come out of Israel and see what difference that makes.
But are we likely to get it in 2 weeks? Any kind of result?
I don't know that you'll get a result, but you'll have a clearer idea of whether there are things in those documents that impact on your judgment. But the majority view in Europe would be to keep the agreement, but to try and add to it. And the real problem is what Iran is doing all over the region, the Middle East, is an additional issue to the nuclear program. So, I mean, I'm in the Middle East about twice a month. All over the region, the destabilizing effect of the Iranian regime is clear, whether it's in Syria or in Iraq or in Yemen or in Lebanon or in the pressure they're trying to put on the Gulf states. So I think one question is obviously the nuclear deal, but the other question is how do you build a strong enough alliance between the US, Europe, our allies in the Middle East, including the Israelis, the Saudis and others, to push back against that power in order to produce greater stability within the region. Yeah,
it certainly calls to question any kind of peace efforts that we have seen taking place in the Middle East. I know with your work there, what does this mean for the dynamics of Syria, for Palestine, for Israel?
Well, I think what it does is it places an even greater emphasis on the need to have that alliance, which today could include not just the Jewish state of Israel, but the Muslim states in the region, in order to say, look, this region is about how you achieve religiously tolerant societies, rule-based economies, and how you have transitions to governments that their people really want. And in this instance, I think there is a real alliance that could be there between the US, between Europe, and between these other countries. But its greatest obstacle is the ability and willingness of Iran to fight very hard to create its own sphere of influence within the region.
It's a tall order for a world that's a lot more suspicious of multilateral arrangements and agreements than it used to be. Let's talk now about Brexit, because I know as recently as late March, you said that it's not too late to stop Brexit. Do you still believe that? And how would that even happen if you were to stop it?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because people say, look, the government's in favor of Brexit, the opposition, in theory at least, is in favor of Brexit, so how can it not happen? And the answer is that what we've learned since the referendum in June 2016 is that this negotiation is much, much tougher than people thought. And essentially, there is a central dilemma that the government has not yet resolved about our future trading relationship with Europe. Either the government goes with an arrangement that stays close to Europe, in which case we'll be abiding by a lot of European rules, in which case a lot of people will say, why are we leaving then? Or alternatively, we'll have a clean break with Europe, go our own way, in which case the economic dislocation, given that half of our trade is with Europe, is going to be significant. Once the government resolves this dilemma, they've then got to put a vote to Parliament. In that vote, because the government lost its election last June in the general election, so now it governs as a minority government, I think they're going to find it very tough to get a proposition through the House of Commons. If there is gridlock there, then frankly the simple thing is to say it should go back to the people for the final decision. And so this wouldn't be a rerun of the last referendum, it would be a different vote. Do you want this deal that the government's negotiated, or do you want to stay?
Well, clearly the government wants to move forward and not result in gridlock in another referendum, at least the government at its current form.
But part of the trouble is that the government itself is fundamentally divided as to whether it wants close to Europe or clean break from Europe.
Yeah, things are not helped either with the recent resignation of Amber Rudd as well. One of your organization's missions is to revitalize centrist leaders and parties. Basically find a way to occupy the space that you once occupied, right? What's your involvement in the new centrist party in the UK, the Project One movement? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm not involved in any new centrist party, and we're not at the stage at the minute, at least, of even talking about that in a realistic way in the UK, and it's not something I'm involved in any event. But the truth is, if you end up with the right wing going into a heavy nationalist position and the left wing going for old-fashioned sort of socialism from the 60s, you've got a big space in the middle. And so I always say it doesn't matter what I think or anyone else thinks. In politics, if you leave that big vacuum, at some point someone will fill it. But the key to it is to get the policy agenda, which is what we really work on, that allows us to deal with the true challenges of the modern world. And those true challenges, look, we need controls on immigration. But migration for countries is essentially a good thing if it's properly controlled. Likewise, when the left go anti-business, this is foolish if you destroy and undermine the enterprise sector. The real challenge today is what are we going to do about the big industrial technological revolution that's coming down the track of us, that's going to change the way we live and we work, and how do we prepare people for it, access its opportunities, and mitigate its risks. And so it's not just about being in the center, it's about having a policy agenda that can reignite optimism about the future and show people there's a way to navigate through this process of change.
Now, speaking of immigration and of technology, you have proposed radical change in immigration policy in the UK and globally, in part by using technology to replace official ID cards with an e-identity system based on access to phones and computers to discourage illegal immigration and encourage highly skilled immigration. Do you sense any receptiveness to this at all across Europe in the UK?
I think there's a big receptiveness amongst people because, look, what most sensible people think is that immigration can bring fresh energy, fresh ideas. It's very necessary for your workforce. On the other hand, people want it controlled. They don't want to feel it just happens. And they want to feel that immigrants who come into our countries understand our values, share our values, and will abide by our values. So what we need to do is to create, and technology again allows us to do this, create a situation in which we know who should be here legally and who's here not legally, and where we're pursuing policies of integration so that at the same time as people can pursue whatever religious faith they want, for example, they're also knowing that there's a shared common space around the values of democracy and rule of law, equality for people, that are the things we have to share in common. So I'm trying to get to an immigration policy that isn't a kind of let everyone in and isn't a immigrants are the problem, but allows us to have immigration, but to control it in a way that meets people's genuine anxieties.